In the world of Eberron, the Warforged are living constructs. They were originally created to be soldiers on the front line of a bloody 100-year conflict known as the Last War. Now, as you might expect from a 100-year war, the death toll on all sides of the conflict had become pretty unsustainable. I mean, one of the nations, Karnath, had to resort to using undead because it was just so hard to keep their regular troops marching and fed. So in an effort to bolster the ranks of the five armies and keep this very profitable war going, a dragon-marked house known as House Cannith, essentially a private company, devised a plan to create artificial soldiers. Using large eldritch machines known as creation forges, House Cannith brought these constructs to life and called them the Warforged. They began selling them to all of the five nations as an answer to the dwindling troop counts, and the war continued. The Warforged, however, were more than just mindless automatons. They awoke in their creation forges with all the hopes and fears and feelings that a human might have, yet they were born into adulthood with no knowledge of the world outside of the impressions they were given by the first people they met. So with no direction other than to follow their creator's instruction, they all marched to war. But when the war finally ended, many Warforged were left without direction. They'd been handed a weapon and marched off to battle, but many hadn't considered what would come afterwards. Furthermore, few Warforged truly had a grasp on their own existence at all. I mean, who were they? How were they made? Were they truly alive? Did they have souls? Many Warforged assumed they'd simply never know the answers to these questions. Some Warforged, however, couldn't resist the temptation to dig deeper. Some Warforged possessed an unflinching desire to find the truth. Steeljack, like most Warforged created during the last war, served as a soldier in the military. Steeljack served under a Brailish commander, one who had a particular hatred for the Warforged. Time after time, Steeljack witnessed abuse, cruelty, and the needless sacrifice of his own fellow Warforged at the orders of his commander. One day, Steeljack decided he'd seen enough. One afternoon when his commander was away, Steeljack took his most loyal soldiers, commandeered a boat, and deserted the Brailish army, sailing as far away from the last war as he could. Steeljack and his soldiers set sail across the ocean and landed in Zendrik, a mostly uncharted jungle continent far away from the troubles of the war. Now this was an ancient and mysterious land, one that was home to the mighty empire of giants way back in the day before their fall many years ago. Explorers and archaeologists had been coming to this continent for years, trying to explore the jungles and find hidden secrets within the ruins. Steeljack and his men ended up finding a home in the port city of Stormreach, which was an independent city-state on the continent, and they began careers as city guardsmen, calling themselves the Iron Watch, and made themselves pretty useful. The years went on, and one day while walking the streets of Stormreach, Steeljack met a peculiar figure. This figure called himself Laith. He appeared to be a Warforged, yet he claimed to have not been built by House Cannith. He claimed to have lived on this continent his entire life. And that's when Steeljack learned the real truth. House Cannith did not invent the creation forges that birthed the Warforged. They merely discovered them in ancient ruins. Their dragon mark had made them uniquely capable of operating the magical machinery, sure, but it didn't give them any specific understanding of how it actually worked. These forges were a mystery even to them. So Steeljack was forced to ask himself then, if House Cannith didn't create the Warforged, then who did? Exploring Eberron says the following about what being born a Warforged might be like. As a Warforged, your body was made in a Cannith forge hold. The creation forge wove root-like muscles across a frame of metal and darkwood, bathing your body in alchemical fluids, giving you skin of steel or hardened leather. And then the miracle occurred. You came to life. You're made from wood and steel, but you're alive, aware, capable of feeling love and anger. You were born with an innate sense of purpose, the knowledge of war burned into the back of your mind. But you aren't bound to follow the path that your creators planned for you. You have freedom. You have the ability to learn. Perhaps you even have a soul. So the creation forge here seems to be doing some pretty amazing things. It's weaving an entire body from scratch and bringing it to life like Pinocchio. But I think it's worth noting how much of this process is unknown here. How is this creation forge working? How does it create sentient life? Does the Warforged indeed have a soul? Well, the reason why these questions are left so open is because even House Cannith, the supposed creators of the Warforged, don't know the answers. Exploring Eberron goes on to say, Cannith artificers designed your body and made you for a purpose. When the creation forge imbued you with life, there were things you knew. If you were built to be a warrior, you knew how to wield a sword and a pike. You had an instinctive sense of squad tactics. There were things Cannith instructors had to teach you, but even there it felt almost as if they were reminding you of things you already knew. This is one of the mysteries of the Warforged. Where does your sentience come from? Cannith gave you direction, but they didn't design your mind. If they could, they'd have made you without emotion and likely without the capacity for true independence. And that does seem to track. I mean, if you were creating an army of automaton soldiers, you'd want them to mindlessly obey, right? I mean, why would you purposely open up the door for an inevitable desertion and insurrection when you know how the machine works and you have complete control? So it seems quite obvious here that House Cannith's most important role in the Warforged creation really isn't much higher than they know how to hit the on button. So the big question then remains, who really designed these forges and why? Why would you make an eldritch machine that can create a fully sentient species? Well, before we can begin to answer that, I think it's important to look at another piece of the mystery that we haven't discussed yet, the Docents. In Eberron, a Docent is a sentient magic item, a sphere that attaches to the chest of a Warforged and offers guidance. Ancient Docents have been discovered in Zendrik, artifacts of unknown age and origin, exploring Eberron. So, these Docents are also not something that House Cannith is out here making. They're finding these things in Zendrik and just plugging them into Warforged. They don't understand why they exist, they only understand how it benefits them. So if the creation forges are made in Zendrik, and Docents are made in Zendrik, and Docents are designed to function with Warforged, then perhaps trying to find out more about the Docents might get us closer to the mystery of the Warforged. Well, this part of the mystery actually leads us again back to Zendrik with Steeljack and Laith. As we had stated, Laith had told Steeljack that House Cannith did not invent the Warforged. He claimed to have been created here on Zendrik many years ago. Now, he didn't have all the answers, but he was dedicated to helping Steeljack and his people find them. While keeping up their day jobs as City Watch, they spent their spare time following up on leads and ancient rumors. And in their expeditions, they did find ancient Warforged parts. These parts had strange designs not found in a standard Warforged. These included sharp wings, claws, and many weapons and magic items seemingly designed with the intention of fighting giants. This included, for example, the Behemoth Belt, which would enlarge a Warforged to giant size, or an elemental axe meant to be installed on a Warforged to take advantage of a giant's elemental weakness. And most importantly of all, they discovered more Docents. They began trying to uncover all of these very ancient Docents, anyone they could get their hands on. As sentient magic items with memory and personality, each one that they discovered held a new piece of the puzzle. And it was a Docent just like this named Shira, which would hold answers that none of them expected. You can learn more about Shira and Dalcor and the Quori and their war with the giants on Zendrik in our last video, The Secrets of Eberron's Lost Moon, but we'll touch on it a little bit here as well. Shira was one of these Docents, and Secrets of Zendrik tells us this about her. Docents are intelligent magic items designed to advise and aid the Warforged who utilize them. However, the Docent that calls itself Shira claims that these items originally held a different purpose. Designed to hold quori spirits, providing a refuge from the spiritual change that destroyed the quori of the last age and paved the way for the coming of the Dreaming Dark. Shira claims to be the sole success of the Docent program and the last survivor of the previous age of Dalcor. So again, just to touch on it briefly, in Eberron, the quori are creatures from Dalcor, the plane of dreams. These are dream spirits that seem to shift between being creatures of light and creatures of nightmare, depending on where you are in history. They appear to be ethereal spirits whose main way of interacting with our world is through psionics, dream manipulation, and body possession. Now, if Shira is indeed a quori spirit trapped within a Docent, she's a quori unlike any that we currently know in Eberron. She's a relic of a much, much older time. She does tell us this: "My thoughts are crystal and light, and they do not fade with the passage of time. Nations have risen and fallen while I have lain in my coffin of steel. Dalcor is forever lost, and what remains is a twisted abomination. Believe what you will, but the quori came to this world in search of salvation, not conquest. It was the denizens of this land, the Sulat League, the Group of 11, and the Emperor Kulsir who brought war upon us, and ultimately destroyed both of our worlds. I am all that remains of the Dreaming Heart, the last spark of light in this new age of darkness, and you're not ready to hear the tale I have to tell." Now, what she's describing here is the war between the quori and the giants that took place hundreds of thousands of years ago on the continent of Zendrik. She's describing building the Docents in order to house quori spirits to escape the calamity enveloping their home plane, thanks to the giants. Now, Docents have always been described as sentient magic items. Is it possible that this sentience is merely the last remnants of a quori spirit that originally inhabited it? Shira tells us that she's the sole survivor of the Docent program, so could there have been failed attempts that created only residual souls within the various Docents? Or could it be that designing the Docents to be sentient was a necessary function? A quori's main method of manifesting on the material plane is typically possession, so maybe in order to safely arrive in a Docent, the quori had to give it a sentience to possess. Regardless, if what Shira is saying is true, then we know that the quori at least invented the Docents, whatever became of them afterwards. So if that's true, then could it be that it was the quori who also invented the Warforged? Well, it stands to reason. If the Docents were designed to hold ethereal spirits, and Docents were designed to function symbiotically with Warforged, then it stands to reason that all three of these are linked. But how? Well, let's try to examine this like a quori might. You have your Docent, which houses your spirit, but it's just a tiny little 2-inch orb. You're not going to be doing a lot of interacting with the world in this form. So naturally, the next step is to build an extension of the Docent, a vehicle of sorts for it that the Docent can be housed in, that the Docent can control, so that way they can perform more varied tasks with these bodies. Well, now you have something. Now you have the Docent acting as a brain of sorts and the Warforged acting as the body. And indeed, you can find Warforged like this on Xen'drik. And although their role in history is lost to time, they were once known as the Corecraft. Secrets of Xen'drik tells us a little bit about them. The secrets behind the creation of the Warforged go back nearly 40,000 years to the war between the Giants and the Quori. During the conflict, the Quori created Prototypical Warforged, crafting a host of constructs that bear a resemblance to modern Warforged but are distinctly different. Some of these Corecraft Warforged still lurk today in the deepest recesses of the continent, left to guard some forgotten outpost or wandering without purpose. These constructs are a danger to those who encounter them. All who are not quori are enemies to the Corecraft, and they attack without mercy or compassion. So it's possible that these prototypical Warforged, the ones that lack true sentience, were the first model. Because these Warforged aren't going around with culture and speaking to people, they are mindless automatons. So it's possible that these were the vehicles meant to house the quori spirits within their Docents. And now, without that guidance, without that steady hand on the wheel, they've merely gone into autopilot. So if we're on the right track, if Warforged can trace their origins back to the quori, then we know why they were created, but we still haven't answered the most important question. Where does Warforged sentience come from, and do they have souls? Well, admittedly, this is where it gets a little shakier, and this is where canon sources start to get a little more and more intentionally vague. It's left to us to use what clues we have to infer our own truth, but we do have a number of those clues. Now, could it be that the Warforged sentience is similar to a Docent sentience? If Docents were designed to hold quori spirits, then maybe Warforged were too. Is it possible that at some point, Docents became obsolete and Warforged became capable of housing a quori spirit? Perhaps the personality we see in each Warforged is the remnant of a long-dormant quori spirit just now being reborn and giving direction. It could also be that the quori were just the first to work on this Warforged technology. We do have evidence in Xen'drik that other cultures gained access to these forges and used them for their own purposes. Secrets of Xen'drik tells us one example of this. Before the fall of the Giants, clans of renegade drow learned the secrets of creating constructs in the ruined creation forges that the quori left behind. In these forges, they built the first Warforged scorpions in homage to their god Volkor. Secrets of Xen'drik. So yeah, that's another fun fact about Eberron. There are drow in Xen'drik who worship a scorpion god, Volkor, as a little bit of a reference to Faerun where they worship a spider god. So yeah, these drow found these creation forges and they were like, well, what better thing to do than create a giant mechanical scorpion in honor to our god, and they did so. So with this as an example, it's worth noting that the Warforged could have undergone several design changes after their original design by the quori, and that could have been more along the lines of what we see today. It could have even been by several different cultures of people all passing the baton to each other through history. The creation forges that House Cannith uncovered and took back with him to Corvair might theoretically have been one of these creation forges that were retrofitted by a later group of people for a different purpose. One of the more likely groups behind this is actually the Giants. In fact, it's reasonably likely that the Giants had a heavy hand in Warforged design from the start. As we mentioned before, the quori likely thought up the idea of the Warforged, but they didn't have an easy way of building it themselves. The only way they could interact with the material plane at all was through psionics and through dreams. And that's why they needed the Warforged to begin with, to give them physical form. So how did they build the forges to begin with? Well, they couldn't build them themselves, so what they had to do was convince others to build it for them. It could have been as simple as giving a really smart giant a dream in which they think that building the forge is a great idea, and then they do so without really understanding why they're doing it. Or if the giant's being particularly stubborn, they could have possessed the giant more directly until the task was complete. Now, it's unlikely that the Giants would have loved being manipulated this way, even if the quori were doing it with mostly peaceful intentions. The discovery of this manipulation could have even been the catalyst of the war itself between the Giants and the quori. We just really don't know the details of that. But regardless, it stands to reason that the Giants would have had reasons to make their own versions of the Warforged after the deceit was discovered. They had the forges, they knew how they worked, why wouldn't they? They might not have wanted to build the creation forges originally, but once they had it in their hands, they might as well build an army with it. It's entirely possible that in this war between the Giants and the Quori, that Warforged marched on both sides against each other. Now, it is possible that the Giants gave Warforged sentience themselves. They certainly would have been capable of great magical feats like that, although I struggle to think of a reason why they'd want to. They had previously tried keeping the elves as slaves under the Empire and were in the middle of fighting a massive elven rebellion as a result of it. So it seems unlikely to me that they'd purposely program the potential for disobedience into their version of the Warforged if they could have just been mindlessly compliant. So, then where do Warforged come from? Well, to conclude, it does seem pretty likely that the inspiration for the Warforged and for the Docents came from the Quori, as a way to manifest themselves on the material plane from the plane of dreams. And we know that they were likely created literally by the Giants while under that influence by the Quori. So then where along the line did the Warforged develop their true sentience, and do they actually have souls? Well, what we do know is that resurrection spells work on Warforged, things like Revivify and Raise Dead. So this would seemingly prove that they do have souls. Those spells would typically fail otherwise. So if that's true, then the only giant question left is, where do these souls come from? Are they indeed dormant quori spirits like we speculated before? We know that Docents and perhaps Warforged were designed to be vessels in a way. Maybe they're souls channeled from Dolur, the plane of souls, and placed into these bodies somehow. But alas, all we can do is really speculate on this front. Within the world, it's something that many people and many Warforged still have to ask themselves every day. But now that the Warforged are free, and they have free will, there are many, just like Steeljack and Lathe, who will never rest until the answers are found.